Hello, you darn tootin' rise of fracking trespassing vermin! My name is TVS Guy, and here is a very well requested video. What is the deal with Kled? Now, in order to talk about Kled, we kind of have to talk about the Yordles first, because one of the things that's interesting to me about Kled is that he kind of represents the first time in League of Legends that Riot have released a Yordle that they knew what they wanted to do with. Like, Kled feels like the first time Riot has had a clear idea for themselves what they want the Yordles to be, what they want the Yordles to do in the League of Legends universe, because the Yordles have been kind of a black hole in League of Legends lore for well over 4 years now. Prior to the 2014 lore retcon, Yordles came from Bandle City, which was a city-state in Runeterra, the same as Demacia, the same as Noxus, the same as, you know, other places like Bilgewater or Piltover or Son. It was a city-state, a nation-state that had its own culture, its own history, and Yordles came generally from there. They also lived in other places, but that was supposed to be the Yordle homeland. Nowadays, it's not entirely clear exactly where or what Bandle City is anymore, and it's not entirely clear where the Yordles come from or how exactly they work, but we do know some things. Like, when I say we don't know how they work, what I mean is there isn't an official explainer on what is a Yordle, how does a Yordle fit in, where did they come from, why do they exist, what gives them their powers, that kind of thing. There really is none of that. But what we do have is a lot of sort of scattered information from each of the Yordle champions that we can kind of put together in order to form a picture of what the Yordles are supposed to be. And generalizing a little bit broadly, Yordles are spirit creatures. They're kind of almost like goblins. And when I say goblins, I don't mean goblins in the Dungeons and Dragons or Lord of the Rings sense. I mean goblins in the old folklore sense. That is nature spirits, little magical creatures that live on the land and tend to take on characteristics that are similar to whatever place they happen to live. To give you an example, in my folklore, where I'm from in Scandinavia, there is folklore about particular types of goblins that like to live in stables on farms, and if you keep on good terms with those goblins by leaving them food and being respectful and so on, they're going to help you out by occasionally cleaning up a little bit, making sure that your cattle and your horses have safe births and don't, you know, break their legs and don't get sick and stuff. But if you get on bad terms with them by not observing the proper rituals, then they will take vengeance on you by playing pranks, by doing bad things, by causing disease, by causing, you know, famine. And if you get, you know, if you get on bad terms with the stable goblins, then they might punish you in one particular way. But if you get on bad terms with the forest goblins, they might punish you in a different way by making you get lost in the forest. And the ones in the field might cause your crops to fail, that kind of thing. And but like each type of goblin that we have in our folklore, and I'm using goblin slightly incorrectly, there's a whole bunch of sub-classifications and various different kinds of creatures. I'm using it as a broad term, but each one has a set of characteristics that are related to the place that they live. And I bring that up with the Yordles because that's pretty much the exact same thing that's going on here. For example, Demacia is, as a nation, is all about, you know, honor and duty and serving in the ranks of the Demacian hierarchy and, you know, keeping true to your blah 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 and so on. And the Yordle that comes most specifically from Demacia is Poppy. In fact, she's been present since the founding of Demacia, according to her lore, and her story is defined by carrying a magical hammer, which she is supposed to deliver to a legendary hero. That is her duty, that is her quest, and she stays true to that quest no matter what. And the tragic irony is that she is the hero who's fated to wield the hammer. The hammer is her weapon, it responds to her, she is the hero, but she doesn't understand that, and she can't realize it because she embodies that Demacian ideal of sticking to your duty no matter what. Of, you know, of living up to your honor, of living up to your word. She said she would find the hero, so she has to keep doing that thing. So she embodies a national characteristic of Demacia in that sense. Similarly, in Bilgewater, we have Fizz the Yordle, who is a kind of fun, playful little trickster. He is the playful trickster, and he plays pranks on people, and he's kind of fun. He's got that rogue charm, that kind of pirate sort of fun times, aha, what a scoundrel, isn't he fun, kind of thing. But his pranks are sometimes also profoundly lethal, as indeed we found out in the audio dramas that were released, where Fizz decides to steal a coin that a captain throws into the sea before the ship leaves harbor. the trouble is that coin wasn't a playful gift that he threw overboard. It was an offering to the bearded lady, Nagakebros, who is the god of the sea, and if you don't perform the proper rites, if you don't give an offering to Nagakebros before you leave port, then there's a decent chance that Nautilus is going to come along and punish you by sinking your ship, which is exactly what happens. So Fizz plays an innocent prank by just stealing a little coin and giving it back to one of the surviving seamen as they manage to drag themselves back to shore. But unfortunately, in the process of playing this innocent prank, he also got, like, many people killed in a very gruesome and brutal way. So he embodies that kind of dual nature where, oh yeah, fun and roguish charm with the pirates, but also they're kind of deadly and terrible in a lot of ways. And Fizz kind of embodies both of those national characteristics. Again, I want to stress something. Riot has never properly expanded on any of this. Like, they've never really released materials that go into depth with any of these themes. So I'm extrapolating from the stuff that's already been released, and I might be giving them more credit than they really deserve. Anyway, moving on to Kled, the reason why we're doing this video in the first place. Kled embodies the national characteristics of Noxus. As Riot themselves put it in a Champion Insights post, if Noxian soldiers made memes, what would they look like? Kled is supposed to be kind of an answer to that. He's supposed to embody a certain kind of soldier culture, a certain kind of black humor and sort of weird self-parody of what Noxus feels like it is. And consequently, he is a shouty, screaming, ornery, psychotic old man who lives in the wilderness, who considers everything his property, and who, I really can't do a southern accent to save my life, and who will fight anyone and anything everywhere for any reason whatsoever all the time, never backing down, never stopping fighting, never giving up, never running away, ever, as an embodiment of the sort of Noxian soul, like, but also as a perverse parody of what the Noxian self-ideal is, because the Noxian self-ideal is very high-minded. It's all about personal responsibility and taking power over your own life, and the strong, you know, pulling themselves up by their bootstrap, blah, 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 that kind of thing. But Kled is a complete rejection of all that self-serious self-importance, manifesting instead as a kind of screaming old lunatic who refuses to be part of any society, because, you know, if you have a society that's composed entirely of individualists, how much of a society do you really have? And Kled is sort of the final parody, the final tragic parody of what that kind of society looks like, where everybody is an angry, screaming hobo, you know, desperately defending their property against everybody else, without any friends in the world, without any ability to form meaningful connections, and without any ability to ever back down from a fight or have any instinct of self-preservation, because everything is always about winning everything always forever. So he's a self-parody, and that parody comes to a beautiful execution in his relationship with his mount Skarl, who is very much as much a part of Kled's character as Kled himself, because Skarl is functionally the opposite of what Kled is. Completely invulnerable, completely impossible to kill. It's a Dracolops is what that particular race of creatures are called. They come from Shurima, I believe, but they are immortal and they are completely invulnerable. Like, they cannot be hurt. They cannot die. But Skarl is also a complete and utter coward, and easily spooked and incredibly stupid. And so you get this comedy duo double act between Kled and Skarl, where Kled has this massive self-serious regard for himself, where he constantly gives himself weird ranks like second lieutenant, weird rear forward admiral, that kind of thing, and puffs himself up and makes himself full of importance and grandeur and military splendor. And then the moment he screams "charge" because he wants to get into combat, Skarl gets spooked and throws him off the saddle and runs away, like that kind of thing. So whenever Kled wants to do something meaningful, whenever Kled has some kind of agenda, something he wants to do, Skarl is there to be the foil, the comic foil, to his sort of straight man, undercutting him, you know, making a joke out of him. And that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Kled is a joke character. Kled is a complete joke. And I say that not as a criticism of the character, but as a description. Kled is a funny story embodied within itself. Kled is the kind of joke that you tell your mates around a campfire in order to cheer up because you know you're going into battle tomorrow. You have the funny Kled stories about the thing that happened when he fought in this battle, and the thing that happened when he was at this tavern, and the thing that happened when he ran into, you know, my cousin Ted had a company that ran into Kled one time, and here's the funny story about what that happened. That's the character that Kled is. Now, we can talk something about the lore, but there's kind of not a lot of point because, like I said, Kled is a joke character. The lore here itself, introducing Kled, basically introduces him as coming from very early in Noxus' history when they're still trying to pacify the barbarians, air quotes, that live in the lands surrounding Noxus itself. A legion of Noxian soldiers are out fighting these barbarians. It's going very poorly. Their morale is kind of broken. They want to run away. Then Kled turns up and screams at their barbarians something about being trespassers on his land and charges right the hell into them, which the Noxian soldiers are somewhat encouraged by, of course, and they kind of follow his example and charge into battle. And then the battle goes kind of poorly because there was literally no plan of any kind, and Skarl runs away, and Kled still refuses to back down because he is literally insane. And just his massive determination, his madness, his screaming, complete idiocy, essentially inspires the Noxian troops to keep fighting and fighting and fighting, completely throwing away all self-regard and all regard for self-preservation, and eventually they do win the fight. Although only like 4 or 5 people, are like literally just a handful of people, are actually left to enjoy the victory, which makes it a Pyrrhic victory, a kind of tragic absurdity. But nonetheless, that earns Kled a place in Noxian lore, in Noxian folklore, in Noxian history, because he is the embodiment of that bloody-minded madness that drives Noxian soldiers to fight and fight and fight, even when all hope is lost, constantly fight just to spite the enemy, as it were. Now, there's a little bit of an expansion going on Kled's mental state in his short story, Where the Dracolops Roam, and it essentially takes the shape of a first-person narrative told from Kled's perspective. And again, we could talk about it, but there really isn't that much to say. It essentially recounts the story of Kled hanging out in the northern steppes. He finds some herders who are herding cattle on his land, and again, remember that Kled considers everything his property, his land, and he decides to confront them about it. And if they say, "Oh, we're herding this cattle for the Grand Lord so-and-so from Noxus," and Kled has absolutely no regard for any kind of rank whatsoever, so he doesn't give a shit, and he fights them, and he wins. That's kind of all that really happens there. And of course, over the course of the story, Kled is fighting them, and Skarl gets spooked and abandons him, so he has to fight alone, and then Skarl comes back right at the last moment to save his hide and ensure that he can win the fight. So the core of the story is not really about what happens so much as it's about exploring the particular relationship between Kled and Skarl, that love-hate relationship he has with the lizard, and also the way in which the lizard kind of grounds him. Like, Skarl is the stupid one in the relationship, but it's also the sensible one. It's when Skarl is there, Kled is a little bit more focused. He's a little bit less completely maddeningly insane because he has something to talk to. When Skarl isn't there, Kled loses all sense of self-preservation, like all sense of any kind of plan or any kind of calmness, and just flies into a horrifying rage, fighting everything that moves. And Skarl comes back at the last moment and pulls him out of trouble when it turns out that just being really angry isn't enough to beat a whole battalion of Noxian soldiers. I have some troubles with the short story. Like, it's told from a first-person perspective, but there's a conflict between Kled's mental state, insofar as we have any lore to confirm it, especially his voice lines, which we're going to get into later, is this kind of fractured, maddened, sort of hyperactive, permanently aggressive hellhole of paranoia and mushroom juice-induced psychosis. But because it's a story that's supposed to communicate information to us, the audience, it kind of splits its time between talking from Kled's perspective and exploring his insanity, and trying to set the scene for us, trying to tell us things about what happens, and, you know, what's going on here, and where is he, and how does he feel about Skarl, and what does Skarl look like, and what does the, what does the area look like, what do the people he's fighting look like, and what kind of people are happening. And the thing that kind of troubles me a little bit is that Kled's whole personality is defined by profound myopia. Like, Kled doesn't care about anything in the world except getting people off his property and fighting. Like, those are literally the only things that matter to him, really. But because the short story needs to communicate information to us, the audience, oftentimes it takes time to explain things in Kled's voice that Kled kind of wouldn't really care about. But that's nitpicking. Like, it works perfectly fine. It just, I feel like it could have been better. Like, I would have told the story from a perspective of the soldiers who encounter Kled. I would have told the story from the perspective of someone... I would actually, instead of doing just one story, I would have done like a little series of vignettes. I would have done... Because Kled is supposed to be the Noxian meme, like this embodiment of sort of Noxian soldiers' humor, I would have done it as a series of campfire stories being told by soldiers about Kled. Like, for me, that would have been kind of a better insight into the kind of role that he plays in the narrative. But anyway, that's nitpicking. Let's get to the stuff that's perhaps more interesting, his character design, because there's something kind of peculiar going on with Kled. Kled is a loud... extremely loud personality. He is extremely pompous. He is extremely angry. He is extremely he has extremely inflated self-regard. He's this very loud, colorful character. Except when you look at him, there really isn't that much color to him. He wears very drab clothes, like this dark teal and lots of browns and steel gray and stuff, with tiny little splashes of color here and there that kind of clash with his strong, colorful personality. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, Kled is already a very loud, shouty, colorful character, but nonetheless, he's supposed to embody a kind of military persona. So the idea that he's wearing a fairly standard uniform, to me, kind of makes sense as a weird comic contrast between the loudness of the character and the relative drabness of his outfit. There's also the issue that Skarl is a very colorful lizard, like these bright greens and the oranges and all kinds of stuff. It's even more pronounced in-game that Skarl has the majority of the color in the relationship between the two, and making Kled this massive colorful character, like full of various colorful clothes and wearing scraps and medals and all kinds of shit on him, that might be a little bit too much from a visual perspective. Like, you want to keep the contrast, and a great way of creating a contrast between Kled's pompous self-seriousness, which would lead him to dress respectably for no other reason except, of course, that that's how he thinks of himself, towards Skarl's more innocent, cartoonish brightness and colorfulness. Because once again, Skarl is the idiot of the relationship, the comic foil, the undercutting thing that makes Kled funny. And so it makes sense to give that kind of colorful, kind of childlike, optimistic, friendly, happy, too stupid to know if they're in danger kind of aesthetic, that bright, colorful cartoon aesthetic to Skarl, while keeping Kled kind of disconcertingly realistic. Like, that looks like a fairly... yeah, that looks like the kind of armor you would wear into battle if you had to fight a war, and not the insane garments of a wildlands hobo defending his property from the interlopers, right? I think this is possible to... I might have liked to see Kled be wearing, like, medals or shoulder pauldrons that are mismatched because he's pretending to have like 150 different ranks at the same time. That's something that comes up a lot in his voice lines, is that he thinks of himself as a rear forward, you know, left brigadier, commando, admiral, all at the same time. So for me, I would have liked to have seen him like wear homemade medals, or medals that he has clearly stolen off corpses or stuff like that. This just kind of embodying that self-important regard for his own rank that he's got going on. But the absence of them isn't really a huge issue. There's also the trouble that Kled is a really small character model. Like, he's a small Yordle. And the more details you pile onto a very small character model, the harder it gets to read, and the more muddy it kind of gets. Like, the more difficult it gets to understand the character design at a glance, which, from an in-game readability perspective, you know, might be an issue. Like, for Kled, you want it to be incredibly, immediately obvious whether he's mounted on Skarl or not. So if Kled, for instance, was wearing bright green and orange colors that matched Skarl's color scheme completely, at a quick glance, like when you don't really have time to look for more than a half a second as your eyes dart over the game console, if if the wrong set of colors are present, you might be fooled into thinking, oh, he's got Scarl, I need to react in a certain way, and be delayed like a half second. And this is not a major thing, but in terms of ensuring maximum readability at all times, it makes perfect sense to have a very strong visual contrast between Kled when he's on Scarl, where there's lots of bright greens and bright oranges, and Kled when he's not on Scarl, when there's no colors. And it's also, from a visual metaphor perspective, it's kind of interesting to have when Kled is alone, he goes completely stark raving mad. Like I said, Scarl kind of grounds him a little bit, keeps him a little bit calmer than he usually is. And in that sense, it kind of makes sense that when Scarl leaves, all the color leaves Kled's world as well. Like, there's no color, there's no fun, there's no innocence, there's no charm anymore. There is just a stark, raving, insane lunatic Yordle who wants you dead and who will stop at nothing to kill you. So all the levity, all the fun, all the jokiness comes out of it. Because, like, when Scarl leaves, their comedy duo is literally dissolved, so all the comedy has left. So from a sort of visual metaphor perspective, I think it makes perfect sense. So let's talk about these champion insights. Like, by the way, one of my favorite things that Riot release ever are these little sketches, and Gnar has a bunch of sketches like this as well, and the reason I love them is because they have so much personality. Look at these things. These are great. These are wonderful. And I just love looking at these. But the thing I want to talk about, they're so good, in this specific thing is the reference to Kilroy. And I'm just going to read from the post. If Noxian soldiers made memes, what would they look like? A weird question, maybe. Let's actually zoom in a little bit. A weird question, maybe, but you can find the answer by cracking open a history book and flipping back to the 1940s when American GIs were tramping around Europe during World War II. Around that time, a pre-internet meme started to appear as graffiti across the continent. An image of a little bald man with an enormous nose peeking over a wall. His name was Kilroy. It's unclear exactly where Kilroy came from or who first drew him. Some say he was named after a man who worked as an American shipyard inspector in the 40s, but a very similar drawing is said to have appeared amongst Australian soldiers as early as the First World War. Whatever the case, American GIs couldn't resist doodling Kilroy all over the territory that they'd conquered, even if it got them thrown into the stocks for the night. To the soldiers, Kilroy was an icon representing their victories, their values, their identities. Kilroy was the spirit of those soldiers, just like the spirit Kled is the spirit of enlisted Noxians. As concepts for a character go, that is actually really compelling. Like, I really, really like this as a base concept from which to start designing a champion. To take something from the real world like that and then twist it through the fantasy lens of a game like League of Legends. That's honestly inspired. Like, that's one of the better character concepts that Riot has ever come up with, to draw from that kind of thing and then try to twist it into their own weird fantasy universe. That to me is very good. And as they say here, life isn't easy for the men serving amongst the lowest ranks of the Noxian soldier class. To survive in that job, you have to learn to love war, hate cowardice, and seize whatever blood-soaked glory you can get. With this in mind, we began to imagine a character who would take those Noxian warrior values to the extreme. An ornery creature that relished riding into battle and chopping heads. Someone who'd never back away from a fight, who'd always want to go ham. Who better to represent the ideals of these troops than a murderous mounted Yordle soldier? And honestly, props to Riot for the whole concept, for the whole execution of Kled, because it's about as good as their character concepts ever get. Like, there really isn't a lot to criticize about Kled, at least not from me. I really don't have a lot to say about, oh, you could have improved this or you could have made that thing, but a little nitpicks maybe, but as a core character concept and as an execution on that concept, Kled is damn compelling. And mostly my criticism of Kled is I want to see more stuff about him. I want to see stories that soldiers tell around campfires about Kled. I want to see what happens when Darius is leading an expedition and his troops run into Kled. What happens when Kled encounters a character who's all about calmness and control like Swain? That sounds like it would be funny as fuck. And would be the kind of story that would inspire soldiers for generations to laugh at their superior officers. Like, there's a lot of good stuff going on here that I would love to see more of. Finally, I want to just appreciate Kled's voice work, because the voice acting for Kled is glorious. It is absolutely fantastic. I adore every second and moment of it. Kled is a Looney Tunes character. It is magnificently well pulled off.
Slow down so I can kill something!
Actually, let me just kill the music, turn up the volume.
Slow down so I can kill something! You are perturbing my tranquility! Why ain't they saluting me? They should be saluting me! Salute me now! You just justified a preemptive retaliatory strike!
That tells you a lot about Kled's personality right there. You just justified a preemptive retaliatory strike. A retaliatory strike before anything has actually been done to him, because Kled lives with the permanent assumption that everybody wants to fight him because he wants to fight everybody.
I'll say something witty after I kill you!
And here's one of the clever things that the voice actor does.
I'll say something witty after I kill you!
Right? And when Kled goes completely mad, when he goes completely, and this is while he is dismounted, when Kled goes completely mad, when he's absent from Skarl, not only does he get more aggressive, but...
You thought I was done? Kled ain't never done!
He starts screeching. Like, most of the time, for a lot of...
I'm gonna murder you to death!
Right? Here, the voice is deeper. The voice is deeper, it's more controlled. I'm gonna murder you to death. And then...
I'll say something witty after I kill you!
After I kill you! He gets completely screechy. He goes completely out of his mind, which from an acting perspective is just a great way to express that when he is without Skarl, when Skarl isn't there, he falls much deeper into his underlying psychosis.
I'm gonna cut you open and use your spine for a back scratcher because it is itchy! Very itchy! My brain is full of weasels! I'm gonna reach down your throat and turn your lungs into mittens!
There he goes completely off the rails, you see.
There's fixing to be two sounds! Me hitting you and... Yeah, I like it out here. Freedom, communing with nature, killing hikers.
Jokey jokes.
No! Planning and strategy, that's city folk stuff.
Here's something we haven't talked a lot about with Kled. Kled is also a hillbilly stereotype. Very much so. He's very much that sort of a frontiersman, ain't nobody gonna trespass on my property kind of character. And that informs a lot of the ways in which he reacts to other characters. Like, one of his favorite insults is to call people city folks. Because city folks are soft, city folks are weak, and the real, true strength of Noxus out here on the frontier, you know, eating dirt and shitting lava, that kind of thing.
Well, my foot wanted to meet your ass, and I'm about to give them a shotgun wedding.
I just love that line.
After we finish murdering these folks, what do you think? Tacos? Yeah, tacos.
Apparently tacos exist in the League of Legends universe. Unless they don't, because it's a weird joke and he's a magical creature, so who knows?
I am Kled, High Major Commodore of the 1st Legion, 3rd Multiplication, Double Admiral, Artillery Vanguard Company. You well respect my authority.
Kled likes to give himself imaginary ranks. That's funny.
No, it's just like the assault on Glorf. You seen one artillery vanguard in a commando fleet action? You seen them all.
Kled likes to imagine weird military scenarios where an artillery vanguard takes commando fleet action, which, from a military perspective, makes, let's call it, limited sense.
I didn't become a rear-forward brigadier admiral from running. I am Sir Admiral Major Kled, and I smell a victory potpourri! First thing you learn as a Lieutenant Sergeant Commodore, rely only on yourself. I didn't not earn the rank of Sergeant Double Admiral by not running!
They're just good lines. I also like this one.
Telling people you're a god? Hell, you're barely a paring knife.
That's a good put down of Aatrox.
Them's fighting words! See, Skarl, that's why I don't like people.
Kled likes to talk to his lizard.
Get back here, you rebel flirt, nerd-dubbit!
And this is when he turns completely into Yosemite Sam, which is when I love Kled the most. It's just when he goes...
Curse niggle flubber! Sick weapon poot! Wang tangle poot! Curse now fluffy tang! Get back here, you snow-gazing blaffer! Gnarl flogger! Oh, well, I ain't backing down! I don't back down! Never!
This line, by the way, has a little bit of resonance, because this is the lines that play when Skarl deserts, like when Skarl loses all his HP and runs away.
Gnarl flogger! Oh, well, I ain't backing down! I don't back down! Never!
You can see that instantly, that Kled falls completely, deeply into his maddening, rage-induced psychosis, right? And that's Again, it's not like this is deep stuff. It's not like it's deep characterization of a tortured mind trying to struggle with the reality of blah blah blah. No, it's a jokey joke, but it's a jokey joke that's profoundly informed by his character, and therefore it works really well. Anyway, I just wanted to spend some time on the voice lines because they're just so good, and I love all of them, and it's just fun to go through his massive, extensive list of voice lines. Like Kled, I think when he was released, he had the most voice lines of any champion in the game, which is just kind of adorable. Also,
holy shit, where are we?
That's a good way to introduce a character. Anyway, if you like this video, you should feel very free. God damn it, why is that text on screen again? I was streaming yesterday. Oh, I should actually mention that. A lot of people have been asking in the comments when I'm going to do another video about Dark Souls, and well, I have gathered the footage that I need. I have fought another boss, and I am going to be putting together a video talking about, you know, the fight and the character design and all that stuff. So that's going to be coming within the next, you know, hopefully within a week, depending on how everything else in my life turns out before then. But if you like this video, there's a like button down below. You should feel very free to click it. You could also click the subscribe button, which helps out the channel quite a bit, and I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, if you want to, I do have a Patreon. You can head on over there, and if you have $1 that you're okay with you know, letting someone else have, those dollars are really helpful for me in paying my food and paying my rent, which are things that, I mean, it might just be me, but I really enjoy having a place to live and not being hungry. There's also a dislike button. If you didn't like this video, that's completely fair, and you should feel very free to click the dislike button. I'm sure nothing could possibly go wrong, and you can really just ignore the signs that are posted around the dislike button saying property of Kled. It's, you know, it's fine. Nothing bad's gonna happen. You can just click on it. He doesn't really mind. He's ornery, but he never reacts badly to people clicking on his property. Thank you very much for watching.